Just keep away. It's not your fight.
The story of The Big Boss revolves around our protagonist, played by Bruce Lee Chen Xiaoan, a Chinese mainlander who leaves for Thailand to go work in an ice factory with his extended family. Chen reveals that he is taking a vow of non-violence for his mother and is sworn off fighting altogether. Wow, a kung fu film where we won't see Bruce Lee throw a single punch?
Sure, Jan.
But Chen will certainly have plenty of opportunities to test that promise, for not even 10 minutes after arriving does he witness a street gang harassing an ice stand owner, picking on a little kid, and refusing to pay for anything. This is also the point where he meets his cousin Xu Shen, the moral paragon of the film, who proceeds to beat the living piss out of these street thugs with an honest-to-God smile on his face.
Xu Shen! Yeah, that's right. Uncle, we've been expecting you. Just got off the boat.
That's right. Just came down on the morning ferry.
He's later introduced to the rest of his family and begins working in the ice factory, hopefully to earn enough money to send home. But as it turns out, an ice factory isn't the most profitable business venture, as two of Chen's cousins soon discover that the entire thing is a front, all owned by an organized crime leader known as the Big Boss. Loyalties will be tested, fists will fly. Will Chen be able to keep his vow of non-violence? And will anybody be able to survive the wrath of the Big Boss? The story of The Big Boss is a lot more grounded and down-to-earth than most other kung fu films at the time. While not sharing the same bombastic nature as other martial arts films, it does have a level of subtlety in its ideas and themes that I greatly enjoy. Ideas like corruption, morality, temptation, and ultimately, the movie asks, how do people who wish to live a peaceful life do so in an inherently violent world? Despite enjoying the novelty of having a kung fu plot that's actually subtle and the interesting complexity of its ideas, I still feel like the themes of this film didn't exactly get enough time to be explored throughout the movie. Still, despite the limitations and how little they actually had to work with, I'm still very impressed what they managed to accomplish with the narrative in The Big Boss. And thus, I give this story a pretty average 3 out of 5. In terms of performances, none of the actors really stand out as being especially bad or good throughout the film. Bruce Lee especially has a much more toned down and subdued persona, especially when you compare it to his later kung fu films. At least for half the movie. Yeah, once Bruce Lee actually starts fighting in this film, all of the mannerisms we know him for start coming out swinging. And honestly, I can't tell if that's a good thing or a bad thing for this movie. On the one hand, it really clashes with the much more down-to-earth nature of this film's narrative. On the other hand, though, it's never not entertaining to see Bruce Lee do what Bruce Lee does best. But in terms of the antagonists, there's no confusion, as the bad guys of this movie always devolve into being the most generically and cartoonishly evil they can possibly be at any given moment. With the sole exception perhaps being the Big Boss himself. Because at some point this guy must have realized he was the villain in a Bruce Lee movie, because rather than fight the guy directly, he instead tries to bribe him with a fantastic promotion, a bunch of fancy dinners, and a free night at a brothel? Honestly, maybe one of the smartest things a villain has ever done in a kung fu flick. And for the novelty of that characterization alone, I give this film's acting major props. 3 out of 5 stars. While the film overall is much more grounded and gritty in reality, there are a few moments that stick out as being very technically impressive in terms of special effects. For one thing, there are several points where the actors do this sort of floaty jump. It kind of reminds me of the wire work from the movie Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. And this may in fact be a leftover from the movie's original director, Cha Shang-woo, who wanted the entire film to have a much more wushu sort of style. The film was also a lot more violent before the censors got their hands on it. One scene that was cut out included a guy getting a whole saw put through his head. There's also this great moment where Chen goes back to the ice factory only to discover the dismembered parts of his friends and family's bodies frozen in a massive block of ice. It's very technically impressive and extremely badass. While these moments may seem kind of jarring compared to the rest of the film's more grounded feel, I would argue that the infrequency of such events really enhances the entertainment. Despite being far and few between, the sheer quality of these moments makes them much more surprising and much more fun when they do show up. And for that, I give the movie 4 out of 5 stars for special effects. The Big Boss has the unique distinction of being one of the earliest films to really rocket Bruce Lee's career into international stardom. It's also pretty infamous for being one of the most heavily edited and strangely cut movie of his entire filmography. One of the reasons for this was, much like Zack Snyder's Justice League, The Big Boss suffered from a change in directors around halfway through production. And though the reason for this change is wrapped in speculation and rumor, it's pretty clear from the film itself that the two directors had very different visions for what the film would be. Another major issue is that this film was cut to ribbons by the censorship bureaus. Originally being a much more violent film, The Big Boss suffered from very inconsistent censoring depending on which region it was released into, meaning you never really knew what type of movie you were going to see by the time it reached your end of the globe. The confusing and chaotic production of this entire film has affected almost every other aspect of the movie and really brings it down in terms of visual quality, as well as storytelling, acting, and even action. Thus, because of all these factors, I cannot in good conscience give the movie a very high rating. For visual quality, I give The Big Boss a 2 out of 5. And now we get to the real meat and potatoes of this film, the martial arts. And of course, Bruce Lee's fights are excellent. However, that's kind of like saying Lionel Messi is good at soccer. You can really only judge them with themselves. What's interesting though is that Bruce Lee doesn't actually do a lot of fighting in this film until the back half. Now, usually, I'd say that's a detractor from a kung fu film. But here we have the unique opportunity to see the rest of the cast strut their stuff, and they do not disappoint. There is no shortage of combat throughout this film, and all of the fighting is very technically impressive, well executed, while still keeping to that well-grounded, down-to-earth feeling that the film seems to be trying to go for. However, with that being said, there is a point where Bruce Lee's character rips a guy's lungs out with his bare hands. So, not always the most subtle. Now, while this is still very badass, these sudden and surprising moments of uber violence, along with their infrequency, still kinda stick out in the film's overall plot. Now, none of the fights by any means are bad, nor do they detract from the overall entertainment of the film, but I still feel that the martial arts on display is still a pretty weak showing, especially when compared to other Bruce Lee films, especially the ones he'd make later. So overall, I can only give it 3 out of 5 stars for martial arts. Alright, finally, we've been through every analysis of this film. Time to add up those points and see where it leads us. The final score for The Big Boss is... Wow, that's a lot lower than I was expecting, especially for a Bruce Lee movie. Might not seem like the strongest start, but honestly, the visual quality is the biggest detractor from the film. It kind of brings down every other aspect, but most of those other aspects are still pretty interesting. You might want to give it a look anyway. We have lots of reviews still to come, and I hope to see you again for more Kung Fu Christmas. But until then, happy holidays, and I'll see you soon.